Hello, Taurus. I'm really happy you're here. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's spend a little time together. As always, this is a general reading, so not every message will be for everyone, but I have to say, the energy showing up around you is already getting my attention. Because before I even pulled all the cards, there was this feeling that somebody has a lot more to say than they've been letting on. And what's interesting is that this doesn't feel rushed. It doesn't feel impulsive. It feels like someone who has been sitting with their thoughts for a very long time. Someone who has replayed old conversations, old memories, and maybe even old mistakes more times than they'd like to admit. So if you've been feeling like something is shifting behind the scenes, let's see why. Because there may be more happening here than meets the eye. Okay, Taurus. The moment I started laying the cards down, I got very quiet. Not because the energy felt heavy. Actually, it felt surprisingly gentle, but it felt important. You know when somebody has been carrying something inside for so long that eventually it starts showing up in everything they do, the way they look at their phone, the way they pause before responding, the way they keep revisiting the same memory even when they're trying to move on. That's what this feels like. And honestly, I don't think this person expected to still be thinking about you this much. I really don't. Because what I'm seeing here is someone who may have convinced themselves that distance was the answer. Maybe they believed enough time would make things easier. Maybe they thought silence would help them sort out whatever they were feeling. But instead, it almost feels like the silence started becoming louder. Every day that passed created another question, another what if, another conversation they wished had gone differently. And then I see the judgment card. What's fascinating is that the energy around this card doesn't feel dramatic. It feels personal, very personal, almost like somebody is having a conversation with themselves. The kind nobody else gets to hear. The kind that happens at random moments. Driving home, lying awake, walking through a grocery store and suddenly being reminded of someone they thought they had moved beyond. Because that's what keeps happening here. You keep showing up in their thoughts. And I don't think they've fully understood why. The more they try to ignore it, the stronger it seems to become. The more they tell themselves to leave things alone, the more they feel pulled toward unfinished words. Okay, and then the Eight of Wands appears, and the entire energy shifts. Because now I'm seeing movement, not necessarily action yet, but movement. Like something inside this person is beginning to change. Their thoughts are speeding up. Their emotions are becoming harder to organize. They keep imagining conversations. They keep wondering how you would respond. They keep asking themselves whether enough time has passed, whether they should reach out, whether you would even want to hear from them. And honestly, I don't think they have answers to any of those questions, but I do think they're getting tired of carrying them alone. What's interesting is that this person doesn't feel arrogant. They don't feel like someone who believes they can simply walk back in and everything will be exactly the same. If anything, I see uncertainty, nervousness, maybe even vulnerability, because there is something here they haven't been able to say, something they have rehearsed over and over in their head, and every time they get close to expressing it, fear steps in, fear of rejection, fear of misunderstanding, fear that too much time has passed. Then we have the Page of Cups, and suddenly the energy softens even more. I almost feel this tenderness coming through. Like underneath all the overthinking and hesitation is someone who genuinely cares. Someone whose emotions may run deeper than they've allowed themselves to admit. You know, sometimes people spend so much time protecting themselves that they accidentally hide their feelings from the very person they want to share them with. And that's what this feels like. There is a sweetness here, a sincerity, something that doesn't feel calculated. It feels human, very human, like somebody standing at the edge of a conversation they should have had a long time ago. And Taurus, I have to say, the moon card sitting here is making this even more interesting, because I keep feeling like there are layers, things unsaid, things misunderstood, things a person may have fully seen at the time. It's almost like this connection became wrapped in uncertainty, wrapped in assumptions, wrapped in emotions that never found the right words. And the strange thing is, I don't think this person has all the answers either. I think they're still figuring some of it out themselves. They're still trying to understand why your energy keeps resurfacing, why your name still creates a reaction, why certain memories refuse to fade, why they suddenly feel this growing need to say something, anything, just to break the silence. Because the silence itself is starting to feel heavier than whatever conversation might come next. And Taurus, the more I sit with these cards, the more I get the feeling that this person is approaching a moment they can no longer avoid. A moment where keeping everything inside may no longer feel possible, because there is one specific thought that keeps repeating itself in their mind. One realization they seem unable to escape. And the closer they get to admitting that truth, the closer they get to reaching for you. Because the closer they get to admitting that truth, the harder it becomes to pretend they don't feel it. And honestly, Taurus, that's where the energy starts becoming emotional. Not dramatic, not chaotic. Just deeply emotional. Because I'm looking at the Five of Cups here, and what keeps coming through is somebody sitting alone with their thoughts. Somebody replaying moments they can't change. Conversations they wish had gone differently. Opportunities they wish they had taken when they had the chance. And I have to say, this doesn't feel like the kind of regret that appears overnight. This feels accumulated, like little realizations piling on top of each other until eventually they become impossible to ignore. You know, sometimes people don't recognize the value of a connection while they're standing inside of it. They're distracted. They're overwhelmed. They're focused on what isn't working instead of what is. But then time passes. Life gets quieter, and suddenly they begin seeing things differently. That's exactly what I'm feeling here. Because this person keeps revisiting something, a memory, a conversation, a version of you they can't seem to forget. What's interesting is that every time they revisit it, they notice something new, something they missed before, something they failed to appreciate. And now it's creating this strange ache inside them. An ache that keeps asking the same question. What if I handled that differently? Okay. The Hermit is showing up now, and immediately everything slows down. This feels like someone who has spent a lot of time alone with their thoughts. Not necessarily physically alone, but emotionally alone. Because there are certain realizations that nobody else can reach for you. There are certain truths you have to discover by yourself. And that's where this person seems to be. I almost see them pulling away from outside opinions, pulling away from distractions, trying to understand what they genuinely feel underneath all the noise. Because for a while, I think they were looking everywhere except the one place they needed to look, inside themselves. And what they're finding there is uncomfortable. Not because it's bad, but because it requires honesty, real honesty. The kind that asks difficult questions, the kind that doesn't allow excuses, the kind that says, no, let's talk about what really happened. And Taurus, I don't think they're blaming you. If anything, I think they're becoming increasingly aware of their own role in how things unfolded. That's what keeps standing out to me. This energy isn't pointing fingers, it's reflecting, it's looking back, it's recognizing moments where fear may have spoken louder than love, moments where pride may have spoken louder than vulnerability, moments where silence may have felt safer than honesty. And now those moments keep resurfacing. Not to punish them, but to teach them something. The Six of Cups is sitting here now, and the atmosphere changes again. Because suddenly everything feels softer, warmer, more personal. I keep seeing memories, tiny details. The kind most people forget. The way someone laughed, a certain phrase they used all the time, a familiar look, a song, a place, something ordinary that somehow became unforgettable. And the strange thing is that these memories aren't showing up because this person is trying to hold on to the past. They're showing up because the emotions attached to them were never fully resolved. It's almost like their heart is revisiting places their mind tried to leave behind. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if there are moments when your energy seems to appear out of nowhere for them. Moments when they're completely focused on something else and suddenly, there you are. A memory, a feeling, a reminder. And every single time it happens, it becomes a little harder for them to convince themselves that this connection no longer matters. Because it does matter. Maybe more than they originally realized. And that's where the Seven of Pentacles starts becoming interesting. Because now I don't just see reflection. I see evaluation. I see somebody looking at everything that happened and asking themselves whether they gave up too soon, whether they stopped trying too soon, whether they allowed temporary circumstances to influence permanent decisions. And I have to say, there's a growing awareness here that some things were left unfinished, not because they weren't important, but because they became complicated. And complicated things often get postponed. People tell themselves they'll deal with it later. They'll say what they need to say later. They'll fix it later. They'll reach out later. But later has a funny way of turning into months, sometimes years. And eventually, people wake up wondering where all that time went. That's the feeling I'm getting. This person is looking at the distance between then and now. And they're realizing how much has changed. But they're also realizing something else. The feelings they thought would disappear haven't disappeared at all. If anything, they seem clearer now. More honest now. Less hidden than before. And that realization is creating movement. Slow movement. Careful movement. But movement nonetheless. Because somebody who once believed they could simply walk away from these emotions is beginning to understand that they carried them the entire time. And Taurus, the more this person reflects, the more one particular regret keeps rising to the surface. Not because it's the biggest mistake, but because it's the one thing they wish they could go back and change. The one conversation they wish had happened differently. The one truth they wish they had spoken when they still had the chance. And the closer they get to facing that regret, the closer they get to revealing something they have been keeping hidden for far longer than anyone realizes. Because the closer they get to revealing it, the more everything around them starts looking different. And Taurus, this is where the energy becomes impossible to ignore. Because I'm seeing someone standing in front of a version of the story they believed for a very long time. A story they repeated to themselves. A story they felt comfortable with. A story that helped them make sense of what happened. But suddenly, that story isn't holding together the way it used to. And honestly, that's not always an easy thing to experience. Because when a person's perspective begins shifting, it can feel like the ground moving underneath them. The Justice card is sitting here, and what immediately comes through is clarity. Not loud clarity, not dramatic clarity, the kind that arrives quietly. The kind that sneaks into your thoughts when nobody else is around. The kind that makes you stop in the middle of your day and think, wait a minute, maybe I didn't see everything the way I thought I did. That's what I'm feeling. A realization beginning to unfold, slowly, carefully, but consistently. Because there were pieces missing. There were assumptions. There were things this person accepted as a truth without ever fully examining them. And now those assumptions are starting to crack. What's interesting is that I don't feel anger here. I don't feel blame. I feel surprise. Almost like they're discovering something that should have been obvious all along. And the more they look at it, the harder it becomes to ignore. Okay, the tower just showed up, and the atmosphere changes immediately, because now I see something collapsing. Not a relationship, not necessarily a connection. I see old beliefs collapsing, old conclusions, old narratives. It's almost like somebody built an entire understanding of a situation using incomplete information. And now they're standing there watching those pieces fall apart, one by one. You know what this feels like? It feels like finally seeing a photograph from a different angle. The picture is technically the same, but suddenly, everything inside it means something completely different. And that's what keeps happening. This person keeps finding themselves revisiting moments they thought they understood. Only now they see details they missed. Now they see motivations they overlooked. Now they see circumstances they never considered. And every new realization creates another question, another layer, another crack in the foundation of what they once believed. Honestly, I think some of these realizations are uncomfortable. Not because they reveal something terrible, but because they reveal something humbling. Because it's one thing to realize somebody hurt you. It's another thing entirely to realize you may have misunderstood them. That changes everything. And I have to say, for some of you, this may involve outside influences, not necessarily malicious influences, just voices, opinions, perspectives. People who thought they knew what was going on, people who offered interpretations, people who filled in blanks that weren't theirs to fill. And over time, those voices became part of the story. But they aren't holding the same power anymore. The more this person reflects, the more they're starting to trust their own observations instead, their own experiences, their own memories. And that's creating a very different picture. The death card is here now, and what I keep seeing isn't an ending. It's a shedding, like somebody slowly removing layers they no longer need. Layers of confusion, layers of denial, layers of certainty that perhaps weren't as certain as they once seemed. And there is something incredibly personal about this process, because nobody can do it for them. Nobody can force this realization. Nobody can rush it. It has to happen naturally. And I think that's exactly what's taking place. Little by little, moment by moment, the old version of the story is losing its grip. The version where everything felt simple. The version where all the answers seemed obvious. The version where they never had to question themselves. That version is fading. And in its place, something much more honest is emerging. What's interesting is that honesty isn't making them pull away. It's doing the opposite. The clearer things become, the more connected they feel to what they lost. The more connected they feel to what was left unfinished. The more connected they feel to you. Because once the distractions start falling away, what's left becomes impossible to overlook. And that's where the Ace of Swords enters the reading. And Taurus, this card feels like a breath. A deep breath after holding it for far too long. I keep seeing somebody arriving at a conclusion. Not because someone told them what to think. Not because someone convinced them. But because they finally see it for themselves. And there's power in that. Real power. Because when understanding comes from within, it tends to stay. This person is beginning to recognize truths they couldn't fully access before. truths about the connection, truths about themselves, truths about choices they made, and perhaps most importantly, truths about choices they didn't make, choices they avoided, conversations they postponed, feelings they never fully expressed. I keep hearing this energy of, I should have said something. Not out of desperation, not out of guilt, just honesty, simple honesty. The kind that arrives after enough time has passed for somebody to stop defending their decisions and start examining them instead. And Taurus, the more this clarity grows, the more something else begins to grow alongside it. Not confusion, not fear, intention. Because somebody is starting to understand that seeing the truth and acting on the truth are two very different things. One realization has already happened, but another decision is beginning to form. A decision connected to words, connected to communication, connected to something they may have wanted to say for much longer than they've ever admitted. And from what I'm seeing here, they're getting closer and closer to choosing exactly how they're going to say it. And from what I'm seeing here, they're getting closer and closer to choosing exactly how they're going to say it. Because something has shifted inside them, not all at once, not in a dramatic flash, but gradually. The kind of shift that happens when somebody finally stops focusing on what went wrong and starts paying attention to what was actually there all along. And Taurus, what was there all along was you, not the version other people described, not the version shaped by assumptions, not the version filtered through fear or confusion, the real you. And honestly, I think that's what has been surprising this person the most, because the more clearly they see you, the more difficult it becomes to fit you into the story they once told themselves. The Empress is sitting right in the center of this energy now, and I have to say, there is something incredibly beautiful about the way you're showing up here. Not because you're trying to prove anything, not because you're demanding recognition. Actually, it's the opposite. What keeps standing out is how naturally you seem to occupy your own space. The energy I'm seeing doesn't chase validation. It doesn't beg to be understood. It simply exists, comfortably, authentically. And that's what has been catching this person's attention. You know, there are people who become more impressive the more you learn about them. And that's exactly what this feels like. The deeper this person reflects on who you really are, the more respect begins to replace old assumptions. The more admiration begins replacing doubt. And what's interesting is that this isn't only about attraction. It's deeper than that, much deeper. Because attraction can happen quickly. What I'm seeing here feels earned. It feels like someone gradually realizing the quality of a person they may not have fully appreciated before. Okay, the Queen of Pentacles appears. And suddenly, I see this person looking at your life from a completely different perspective. Not comparing, not judging, just observing. And what they're noticing is your consistency. The way you keep showing up. The way you've continued building your life. The way you've continued moving forward, even through challenges they may not fully understand. Honestly, I think there are things you've carried that this person never knew about. Burdens you've managed quietly. Lessons you've learned privately. Moments when life asked more of you than anyone realized. And yet, you kept going. What's fascinating is that the more they notice these things, the more their respect grows. Because maturity has a way of revealing itself over time. Strength has a way of revealing itself over time. Character has a way of revealing itself over time. And that seems to be exactly what's happening. This person isn't just remembering who you were. They're recognizing who you've become. And perhaps even more importantly, they're recognizing who you've always been. The Strength card is here now, and immediately I feel this quiet power surrounding you. Not loud power, not forceful power, the kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that remains steady even when nobody is watching. And I think this person underestimated that at one point. I really do. Because there are moments when people mistake kindness for weakness, patience for passivity, compassion for vulnerability. But eventually reality shows them otherwise. And that's what I'm seeing. A growing awareness of just how much strength exists beneath your calm exterior. This person keeps looking back and noticing things they missed. Moments where you showed grace. Moments where you chose peace instead of conflict. Moments where you handled situations with far more maturity than they realized at the time. And every new realization seems to deepen something inside them. Not guilt, not obligation, appreciation, real appreciation. The kind that changes how somebody feels about a person. Because there is a difference between liking someone and truly valuing them. And Taurus, I think they're beginning to understand that difference now. The star is shining through this reading as well. And what I keep feeling is hope, not the loud kind, not the unrealistic kind. Just a quiet sense that perhaps all is not lost. A quiet sense that perhaps there is still something meaningful here. Because when this person thinks about you now, The emotional atmosphere feels completely different. There's less confusion, less resistance, less defensiveness, and more honesty, more admiration, more tenderness. What's interesting is that they don't seem focused on changing you anymore. They're not wishing you were different. They're not imagining some alternate version of you. They're simply seeing you. And for somebody who may have spent a long time looking through distorted lenses, that is a significant shift. I keep hearing this energy of realization. The realization that your value was never dependent on whether somebody recognized it. The realization that your worth remained intact even when it wasn't fully understood. And the realization that some people only recognize a rare connection after enough distance gives them perspective. Honestly, I think this person has been surprised by how much their feelings have evolved. Because what may have started as reflection has become admiration. What may have started as curiosity has become appreciation. And what may have started as regret is slowly transforming into something far more meaningful. Something that makes them wonder whether they still have a chance to say what needs to be said. Because now they're no longer asking themselves whether you mattered. That question has already been answered. The question they're wrestling with now is something entirely different. And it revolves around whether they have the courage to stop observing from a distance and finally step forward. Because Taurus, what I'm seeing now feels very different from hesitation, very different from uncertainty. There is still nervousness here, absolutely. There are still questions, there are still unknowns. But underneath all of that, I see intention, real intention. The kind that begins forming when somebody realizes that staying where they are no longer feels right. And honestly, that's what keeps standing out to me. This person isn't sitting in passive energy anymore. They're starting to imagine possibilities, starting to imagine conversations, starting to imagine what could happen if they stopped holding back. The Lover's card is appearing here, and immediately I feel this pull toward choice, not fantasy, not wishful thinking, a choice, a conscious decision. Because connections like this don't remain in somebody's heart for no reason. They don't continue resurfacing year after year, memory after memory, without asking to be acknowledged. And what I'm seeing is someone who can no longer ignore what this connection means to them. You know, there comes a moment when feelings stop being theoretical, a moment when a person realizes, okay, I know how I feel now. The real question is, what am I going to do about it? That's exactly where this energy seems to be. Because every road keeps leading back to the same place, back to you, back to the things left unsaid, back to the possibility of reaching out. Back to the possibility of seeing whether there is still something here worth exploring. And I have to say, the energy doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like somebody trying to reclaim the past. It feels more like somebody trying to understand whether a meaningful future is still possible. The Two of Cups is sitting beside the Lovers now, and suddenly the emotional atmosphere softens. I keep seeing honesty, not perfect words, not rehearsed speeches, just honesty. The kind that happens when people stop trying to control the outcome and simply speak from the heart. Because sometimes healing doesn't begin with grand gestures. Sometimes it begins with one conversation, one message, one moment where somebody finally says, "Can we talk?" And honestly, I feel like this person has imagined that moment many times. More times than you might realize. They've imagined what they would say, how they would explain themselves, how they would express everything they've been carrying. And every version of that conversation seems to bring them back to the same feeling, relief. Because there is emotional weight here that they've been carrying for a very long time. Weight they may no longer want to carry alone. Okay, the Six of Cups is appearing again, but this time the energy feels different. This isn't nostalgia for the sake of nostalgia. This feels like remembering something valuable, something worth protecting, something worth revisiting. I keep getting this image of someone smiling unexpectedly because of a memory, not a dramatic memory, not some life-changing event, just a simple moment. The kind that seemed ordinary at the time but became meaningful later. And that's what keeps happening. The more they remember, the more they realize how much significance those moments actually held. What's interesting is that this person doesn't seem focused on what they lost anymore. They're focused on what they learned. And that shift changes everything. Because when somebody begins approaching a connection from understanding rather than regret, their energy becomes completely different, less fearful, more sincere, less reactive, more intentional. And Taurus, that sincerity is becoming impossible to ignore. Then I see the Ace of Cups, and honestly, the atmosphere around the reading becomes incredibly warm. Not because everything suddenly becomes easy, not because every question is answered, but because there is openness here, a willingness, an emotional door that appears to be unlocking. I keep feeling somebody wanting to show up differently than they did before, wanting to communicate differently, wanting to express themselves more honestly, because they understand now that protecting themselves may have cost them something valuable. And whether they fully understand the outcome or not, they seem increasingly willing to take that risk. What's fascinating is that this doesn't feel rushed. It feels thoughtful, almost careful, like somebody handling something precious. Because from their perspective, that's exactly what this connection has become. Something precious, something meaningful, something worth approaching with care. The Three of Wands is here now, and the energy expands. I see anticipation. I see somebody looking toward the future instead of constantly looking behind them. And that may be one of the biggest shifts in this entire reading. Because for a long time, their focus was on understanding what happened. Now their focus seems to be drifting toward what could happen, toward possibilities, toward opportunities, toward the chance to create something new from a place of greater awareness. And I have to say, the energy feels hopeful. Not because anything is promised, not because every obstacle has disappeared, but because there is movement where there was once stillness. There is intention where there was once hesitation. There is courage beginning to emerge where there was once uncertainty. And the more I sit with these cards, the more I feel somebody standing right at the edge of a decision. Not a small decision, a meaningful one. The kind that asks a person to be vulnerable. The kind that asks a person to take a chance. The kind that asks a person to trust what their heart has been trying to tell them for a very long time. And Taurus, from where I'm sitting, it feels like they're much closer to that moment than even they realize. And honestly, Taurus, I don't think this reading was really about whether somebody misses you. I think it was about what happens when the truth becomes impossible to ignore. When people finally see things clearly, when they finally recognize value they may have overlooked, and when they begin finding the courage to say what has been sitting in their heart all along. So whatever is unfolding around you right now, just remember that your worth was never dependent on someone else's timing, understanding, or recognition. You've carried that value the entire time. That's all I've got for you for this reading. Thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. I appreciate you more than you know. Take care of yourselves, and I'll catch you in the next one. Okay, bye.